A portion of this video was sponsored by Constant Contact.
This is a 2020 Cadillac CT5-V, and it is not the Cadillac V car you were probably hoping for. Previous Cadillac V models have been luxury muscle cars with giant V8 engines, massive horsepower, and incredible tuning potential. This has a turbo V6, and it's down almost 300 horsepower compared to the outgoing CTS-V. Today, I'm going to review this car and find out what's going on. First, a little background. Cadillac has been developing its high-performance V line for more than 15 years now, ever since the CTS-V originally came out for the 2004 model year. That car, the 2004 CTS-V, had more power than this does, the new CT5-V, even though you would think of this as sort of the next generation high-performance V model. But that's not exactly the situation here. You know how Mercedes has the C63 AMG, and it's like the ultimate high-performance C-Class, and then they came out with the C43 as sort of a lower-tier AMG car to make the brand more affordable? BMW did the same thing. They have the M3, and then they came out with the M340i to make M more accessible for more people. Well, that's exactly what Cadillac is doing here. So that's how we went from a 640 horsepower CTS-V to a 360 horsepower CT5-V. And on paper, it seems to make sense. The CT5-V's numbers put it in direct competition with the BMW M340i, the Mercedes C43 AMG, and the Audi S4. It's logical. But the difference is those brands also have the BMW M3, the Mercedes C63 AMG, and the Audi RS4. Although admittedly not the RS4 here in North America because Audi makes terrible decisions. But still, they exist. Cadillac, meanwhile, has spent all this time and effort building up V as the ultimate high-performance luxury muscle car brand. And then they give us this. Now, Cadillac claims a higher performance V model is coming soon. And obviously, I believe them. I just think it's a bit of an interesting decision to release the mediocre one before the one that we all want and the one that we've come to expect. But it's their car company. They can do whatever they want. I just review it. So today, I'm going to do just that. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the CT5-V and show you all of the interesting quirks and features of the latest Cadillac V car. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a DOUGSCORE. This portion of my video is sponsored by Constant Contact, which is an online marketing company that helps small businesses with online marketing tools and resources that they need to grow. Constant Contact offers a lot of benefits, including email and social marketing. They can be your trusted partner to deliver results for your business, with powerful tools to make you look more professional and the people and expertise that provide guidance, support, and education to help your business achieve its goals with email marketing. You can also use Constant Contact's Site Builder to create a professional-looking branded website for your business, delivering a personalized and mobile multi-page website in just minutes, complete with images and guidance on content. Constant Contact also offers all the tools to help you sell online with e-commerce. Whether you're just getting started or whether you already have an existing platform, you can get more sales from new and existing customers and get expert retail marketing advice from Constant Contact. If you're interested in growing your business, try out Constant Contact for free using the link in the description below. And thanks to Constant Contact for sponsoring this portion of my video. Now back to the CT5. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the CT5-V with getting in, where you think you will be bombarded with V logos. When you walk up to the car, there is one on the front fender to remind you it's a V. Then you open the door and there's one on the door sill, another V logo. Then you look a little further, there's one on the floor mat, another V logo. And you think, well, there's just going to be Vs everywhere in this interior, just total overkill. But there's not. That's actually the last V logo. There's no others anywhere in this entire interior. So, considering my misgivings about this even being a V car, it's good that they don't really throw it in your face and they keep it subtle. But anyway, on to some other interior items. You have some very unusual controls in here. Let's discuss. Now, Cadillac's previous generation infotainment system was called Q, and a lot of people hated it. It was apparently difficult to use, problematic. I didn't ever find it as bad as most people did, but it was universally negatively regarded in the car business. So, Cadillac's latest infotainment system, they've made some changes to make it easier to use, and some of those changes are, well, they're just strange. Here's an example. You can move around the screen using your fingers, the touch screen, and you can just move to the next screen, left or right, like most. That's pretty common. Or you can use this dial in the center console to move around your infotainment screen. You just twist the dial and it goes between all of the different pieces on the screen. Again, pretty common, and that gives you the opportunity to choose whether you want to use it as a touch screen or with the dial, which is a nice redundancy to have. But it doesn't stop there. You can also use this little dial right under the screen. You twist that and you can again move around on the screen, doing the very same thing you would do with your finger, just 2 inches higher. So Cadillac has built in like multiple redundancies just to make sure people can't complain that they don't have anywhere to adjust the screen. And it gets more unusual than that. Let's say you want to adjust the volume. You're the driver of the car. You can press these little buttons on the steering wheel to change the radio volume up or down, pretty common. Or there's a little volume dial in the center console right next to the dial for the infotainment screen. You can just twist that and the volume goes up or down. Again, pretty standard stuff. But there's also a third option. You have another volume dial right below the center screen. You twist that and it changes the volume up or down, meaning that the driver has 3 separate volume controls all within an easy arm's reach. All of these controls are separated by about 12 inches each, 3 different volume controls. I've never seen that level of redundancy put into an infotainment system, but Cadillac really wanted to make sure that there was no room for anybody to complain about not being able to easily adjust stuff. Now, the funny thing about all of these redundancies is that the newest Cadillac infotainment system is actually really easy to use, far better than Q before. It's tremendously responsive, it's tremendously intuitive. I've reviewed it in other General Motors models, but it's a really good, easy, simple, usable, responsive infotainment system, way better than Q. So you don't really need all these redundancies, but Cadillac has them anyway, just to cover their bases. They do not want any more bad infotainment reviews. There are so many redundancies in this system, in fact, that you have regular climate control buttons below the screen, so you can make all of your climate control adjustments using these buttons and switches, which is always what people prefer. But you also have climate controls in the screen. So if for some reason you're sitting here, you don't want to press the obvious button to change something in the climate controls, you can go into the screen and adjust it there also. So there's a redundancy even for the climate controls, even though it has hard buttons. That's pretty crazy. Again, Cadillac wanted to make sure everybody was satisfied with the new infotainment. But anyway, let's go back to the infotainment system. There are some cool features in there. One gives you the ability to activate the heated or cooled seats when you remote start the car. You can remote start it with the key, and if you have the climate control set to automatic, it can tell if it's cold or warm, and it will turn on the corresponding heated or cooled seats. So when you get in the car, your climate control won't just be making the cabin perfectly comfortable, but your heated or cooled seat will already be on to make you as comfortable as possible. That is a pretty cool feature. And next up, another cool feature in the infotainment system, it lets you adjust the car's V mode. You go in there and you can change various aspects of the driving experience, like for example, the steering steering responsiveness, the suspension, even the braking or the engine sound, all adjustable in the V mode setting in the infotainment screen. Then, once you have that configured to your perfect liking, whenever you want to go into that driving mode, you press the V button on the steering wheel and instantly you go into your pre-selected V mode. So if, for example, you want a driving mode that has great acceleration feel but comfortable suspension, you can set that in V mode and then you can switch into it every time you get in the car and press V on the steering wheel. That's a cool feature, and it's a cool, easy way to activate it rather than having to go into some screen or adjust some dial multiple levels. With that said, you can also change between Cadillac's pre-selected drive modes pretty easily. Next to the gear lever, there's a little switch marked mode. You can press it up or down and go into the various drive modes, which are Tour, Sport, Track, and Snow and Ice. Those are your choices in the CT5-V. And next up, since I'm starting to touch on the gauge cluster, let's talk gauge cluster. It's kind of surprising, actually. The gauges in this car are analog, fixed, old school gauges in place, which is unusual at this price point. Most of this car's competitors have a large screen in the gauge cluster with no more analog gauges, but the CT5-V still kind of old school with its traditional gauges. But it does have a large screen right in the middle. Not as big as some rivals, but still very big and very high quality. Now, there are several interesting items you can access in this screen. One is this car's V performance data. If you go to that tab, you can see various different things like your G forces that you've hit or that you've hit in the past. You can see your 0 to 60 time. It allows you to measure it on the fly. You can also check out various different temperatures. One new one for me is the ELSD coupling screen. This will actually let you know where power is being distributed as you're going around corners. Not exactly sure why you'd want to know this on the fly. And if you're in the type of driving where you'd be activating this, you probably should be looking out the window, not at your screen, but it's there, I guess, to kind of prove that it can measure that information in real time. Now, unfortunately, with that center screen, the drawback is the map is not very good. Here I am on the navigation tab, and you can see it's just not really providing that much info, the direction I'm traveling and the city I'm in. I assume if we were going somewhere and had a direction set, it would be telling us like the next turn, but regardless, this is nowhere near as good as Audi's giant full screen map with Google Maps. You can see the satellite image. It's way, way better than this. This is sort of a very watered down version of what other brands are doing. With that said, although the gauge cluster is pretty clearly behind rivals, especially for a brand new car like this, I wouldn't say that about this interior. This is a pretty nice looking interior, frankly, and the materials are pretty nice. There are some pros and cons to the interior, but generally I would say it's a pretty good place to spend time and surprisingly close to European rivals. Some big benefits in here. I love the two-tone seats, the black and white. I think they look good. And I love the red stitching pretty much everywhere, which nicely complements the carbon fiber, which has a little twinge of red in it too if you look closely. All of that stuff looks really nice. But like I said, there are a few drawbacks. One is clearly the plastic buttons pretty much everywhere. The climate controls, the center console, the steering wheel. I wish these just looked a little bit nicer. Same deal with the shift lever. To me, this looks like a cheap car shift lever. Doesn't really belong in a car like this, competing with Audi, Mercedes, BMW, especially at the $50,000 and up price point where this car is. But like I said, this interior is generally a nice place to spend time with good materials. It's a pretty solid effort. I think the biggest drawback really is that gauge cluster. It just feels so old school compared to rivals that pretty much all do it better. And next up, we move on to the back seat of the CT5-V. And I have to say, sitting back here, rear seat room is generous. Now, it may not seem like that because as I sit back here, my knees are pretty much right up against the front seat with only about an inch to spare. But the reason it's generous is because I've been in the rivals, the Audi S4, the new BMW 3 Series. They're way smaller back here. This is definitely the largest back seat in the class. And if you want to use this as a family car, this is the one you're going to want to do it with. That makes sense because the CT5-V is longer than rivals, about 6 inches longer than the Audi S4, and several of those inches feel like they're in the back seat. Otherwise, though, the back seat is not really notable for anything special. You do have 2 climate vents in the center, and you also have 2 charge ports right below them, one USB-C and one old cigarette lighter style charge port, but nothing particularly unusual here. In terms terms of room, I will say there is one drawback: headroom. If an adult is sitting back here, my head is right up against the ceiling. That's due to this car's sloping roofline. It doesn't really have the traditional sedan look. It sort of slopes for a more sporty appearance, and that definitely robs rear headroom. If you have adults back here, it may not quite be a perfect fit. Now, the weird thing about this sloped back thing is it doesn't really have a purpose. Most cars with this sloped back are designed that way because they're a hatchback, like the Audi A7, for instance, or like my Kia Stinger. They're sloped because this whole thing is a tailgate and you open it and access the cargo area, but not the case with the CT5. Instead, this car just has a normal trunk like every other sedan, but it has the sloped back like it's a hatchback. The other thing that happens when you make the sloped back look is that the side of the car is basically extended back compared to a regular sedan with a regular rear window. And in this car, that means they have to put this large black panel here, sort of looking like a fake window, but it isn't. It's just a big piece of plastic on the side of the car. So they have this sloped back design to mimic hatchbacks like the Audi A7, but it isn't actually a hatchback. The only purpose that sloped back really seems to serve is robbing rear seat headroom, which isn't really the best idea if you ask me. But anyway, as for the trunk itself, nothing particularly interesting here, although it is a little bit deceptive. Because of the sloped back, you have a relatively small trunk opening, but when you look inside, you can see it is quite deep. It is a very nice sized trunk, especially for a vehicle in this size class. So you do get a good sized cargo area, even though you aren't getting a hatchback like you might think when you look at it. But anyway, next I want to talk about the name of this car. CT, that's a 5, not an S. Even though Cadillac had a model called CTS, this is CT5, which I'm sure will be endlessly confusing for consumers, or it would be if they cared about sedans anymore. The reason Cadillac now has a number in this car's name is they're doing this for all their vehicles to make it more clear where they fit into the model range. So instead of ATS, CTS, XTS, small, medium, and large, you have CT4, CT5, CT6, which serve the same purpose. It does seem like a more clean way to do it, although it also kind of blends into everybody else. A4, A6, 3 Series, 4 Series. It's just not very distinctive, but that's what Cadillac has decided to do. And next up, also around back, might as well talk exhaust back here. You have a quad exhaust, which is something you would expect from a V car. Even though this might not have as much power, it still has the exhaust. As for the exhaust note, well, it sounds fine. Take a listen. As for other stuff on the outside of this car, styling, I have to say I've always loved Cadillac's angular look with these sharp edges and lights at the corners that kind of emphasize the edges. I think they all look really cool, and I think that's true for this car as well, although I have to say, once again, that sloped roofline is kind of an odd thing because it's this gradual curving slope on a car that primarily has angular styling lines, and so it doesn't really fit all that well into the design scheme. I really think Cadillac would have done better to just make this a more traditional sedan without that sloping roofline. And next up, speaking of this car's styling, one of my very favorite styling elements here is these front lights, and especially this running light pipe that looks like it's going through the front bumper. I think that is a really cool look, very distinctive to Cadillac, and I think it's a great job. It makes this car look aggressive and special. Now, when you turn on the turn signal, up in front, the lower part of this light pipe turns on as the turn signal, so sort of the lower half, and that also is a very distinctive look. You have this big vertical turn signal up front, letting other drivers know you're turning and you mean it. And finally, we move on to the CT5V's engine. Like I said, 360 horsepower thanks to a twin turbo V6. And you know it's twin turbo because it says it on there, twin turbo. Just in case someone was going to accuse you of having a mere single turbo. No, you got a twin. Now, as far as this car's positioning in the segment, this car has about 10 horsepower more than the Audi S4, and it costs about the same as an Audi S4. It's down about 25 horsepower compared to the Mercedes C43 AMG and the BMW M340i, but it also starts about $6,000 cheaper than those cars. This starts right around $50,000. That makes it seem like this car is a good competitor in this segment, about the same price as an S4, but more power and and relatively close behind BMW and Mercedes. The issue comes when you actually look up the acceleration numbers. M340i and the C43 do 0 to 60 about 4.1. The S4 does it about 4.4. This is 4.7. So even though it has competitive power, it's way slower than its European rivals. The reason for that is the size that I was mentioning earlier. Like I said, this is about 6 inches longer than an Audi S4, therefore bigger, heavier, simply not as fast. So if you get one of these, your benefit is better rear legroom, but you're trading some performance compared to the European rivals. And so those are the quirks and features of the new Cadillac CT5-V. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the CT5-V. Screaming up an on-ramp here. Although screaming, not exactly an accurate term. This car's fast, actually, in truth. It's a pretty quick car, but it's not a very quick car. It's fine. The Cadillac says 0 to 60 is something like 4.6, 4.7 seconds. Certainly, having recently driven an M340i and a C43, those cars certainly feel faster. It's been a while since I've been on an S4, but those cars feel faster than this one. Now, the trade-off is, like I mentioned, you're getting a larger vehicle. So you're getting, theoretically, a more comfortable ride, and you're also getting the back seats that are more usable. And for some people, that'll be nice. But I suspect not most people. I think that most people who are in the kind of sports sedan segment aren't really necessarily looking for a family hauler. That's the domain of crossovers and larger sedans. Inside this car, like I mentioned, the interior is nice. It's an interesting mix, and it's kind of a General Motors specialty. You have some really nice stuff. The speaker covers look great. I like the two-tone seats, the stitching, a lot of stuff looks good. But then there's just some stuff where it's like, how could you possibly put that in a car that has a sticker price of like $52,000, $53,000? And I'm really surprised by the gauge cluster. The analog gauge is old school. A lot of people are going to reply to this and be like, I prefer analog gauges. Well, not if you're buying a $50,000+ car. You want the latest tech, especially this segment. It's more younger buyers. They're into that kind of thing. This car doesn't have it, and it feels like an omission. Even kind of regular cars are starting to get that now. The newest Kia Stinger I was just reading is getting a full gauge screen. Well, Cadillac's behind. On the road noise is nice and muted. Does not feel tremendously loud. It's also not a very rough ride. Feels nice and comfortable in here. And I think to an extent, that's kind of the market for this car. It's people who want a more comfortable sports sedan, maybe. Nothing is amazing about this car, but as a general package, I think it's very good, very competent, reasonably priced compared to rivals, unless performance is your main goal, in which case it's just not quite on their level. The issue really starts to come to me with just expectations. That's really all it is. I hear V, I think of a certain thing, this car doesn't deliver that thing. And obviously Cadillac is attempting to make V into, I guess, 2 tiers. You'll have like a base V like this car and then a better V. My problem with that is you came out with the base one first. You always want to come out with the better one first. This is why Porsche came out with the 918 Spyder before trying to trickle plug-in hybrids down to the rest of its model range. Because you can point to the better one and say, look at that. It was in the 918 first, now it makes sense to get it in a Cayenne. Well, here it's like the V range is really cool, we promise, but we're not currently making any really cool Vs. You just have to take our word for it. Overall though, good car, but it certainly isn't a knockout. And to me, again, it just doesn't quite have that V feeling like you've experienced in other V cars if you've had them or been around them. And so that's the Cadillac CT5-V. This is a good car. It has good performance, it has good technology. I think it looks pretty good. There's a lot of benefits about it, but it's not a V. I know, Cadillac says they have a more powerful version coming, blah, blah, blah. I just don't understand why you spend all that time and effort and money to build up the V brand as the ultimate high-performance Cadillac and then use that brand to give us this. The CT5-V is a good car. It's just not a V. Anyway, now it's time to give this car a DOUGSCORE.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the CT5-V is fine. I don't think beautiful. I do think the edgy Cadillac design is a weird mix with the sloping roof, and the wheels look too small. It gets a 5 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Handling is average, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Fun factor is fine. It's not especially fast nor especially light on its feet. It's okay, but not great, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Finally, cool factor, and this car is sorta cool, but a watered-down V won't get too much excitement, and it gets a 4 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 25 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The CT5-V is well equipped, not exactly cutting edge, but good enough, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Same deal with comfort. It's fine, normal for a car like this, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Quality is okay. Reliability will likely be strong in keeping with other recent GM models, but interior quality is mixed. It gets a 6 out of 10. Practicality is normal for a car like this, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Value is mediocre. This car has good power numbers, but not great. Its main benefit will be interior room and the V brand. It gets a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 31 out of 50. Added up, and the DOUGSCORE is 56 out of 100, which places the CT5-V here against rivals. It's fine, not great, but reasonably competitive, but I personally would shop some other cars first. The M340i is more engaging, the Kia Stinger GT is more practical and cheaper, and the Tesla Model 3 is more fun and higher tech.